Let's talk about Windham's equity work and dual language programs on tonight's episode of In and Around WPS. Please don't go anywhere. Good evening. I am Tracy Youngberg, the proud superintendent of the Windham Public Schools, and I'm here today with the Department of Equity and Multilingual Education. To my left, I have Miss Beth Bernay, the director of EME department, as we fondly refer to it. To my right, I have Amy Finsmith and Sherry Poi, supervisors of that department. Tonight's program, you're going to learn all about our dual language programs, the history and development of those programs, and the 30th anniversary of our regionally known Compañeros program, as well as some of the equity work we're doing in the district. So my first question for the EME department is, can someone fill me in on what dual language actually is or isn't? What does it mean to the community to have these programs in the Windham Public Schools?
Sure, I'll give this one to Amy. Okay. So dual language education is a form of bilingual education that has as its goals for students to become bilingual and biliterate, meaning they can speak two languages well and they can read and write in those two languages. For Windham, that's English and Spanish. And also one of the goals is high academic achievement, so they're able to learn at high levels in both languages. For example, they can do science in eighth grade science in both English and Spanish.
Which is kind of amazing, especially if you're a unilingual person like myself. Anything else to add about our dual language programs?
Well, you mentioned, or you asked about what it could mean to the community. And for me, and maybe this relates a bit to the equity work, I think it's a tremendously important, I don't know if it's, I would say gift, but it's an asset of our community, right? That we offer this dual language program and that students who come into our schools already with the richness of bilingualism and biculturalism get to continue to develop those skills, and that we don't see students who are also learning English in a deficit view. And so for our community, it's been a sought after program. I can't speak for Latinos in Windham, but it has been a popular program since its inception, and we have always been asked to grow it and maintain it. And so I think it's something that really celebrates something that's very unique about our little Hispanic community in the northeastern part of Connecticut.
I think you're right about it also touching on the equity work just by design. So that's really important. Anything else about the dual language program you would like the community to know?
I would say some of my favorite stories of why parents talk to us about why they really want their children in the dual language programs are the stories where kids are able to access family members who maybe only speak Spanish. That was I had my own children in Compañeros, and they're able to communicate with their cousins and grandparents only because they were in Compañeros. I get goosebumps every time I tell stories like that. But there are countless students that we have who are able to keep in touch with their families and hear the stories from their grandparents and learn about themselves and their histories and their identities because they're still able to speak English and Spanish.
Yeah, the human stories, right? Mm-hmm. So the community may or may not know that we have a dual language program. We have a one-way dual language program and a two-way dual. Would someone like to explain the difference there?
I'll start and you can tag on. It is the 30th year of Compañeros, and we're going to talk a little bit about the celebration later. But we want to sort of make it really kind of clear for everyone that's listening that we do have two different programs. The two programs, though, have the same goals. The Rios Program, which is much younger, it's in its 6th year now, has the same goals as Compañeros of high academic achievement, bilingualism and biliteracy, and cultural competence for young students. The difference is the student groups that enter those two programs. For a long time, Windham only had the lottery-based Compañeros program. And that program is made up of both English learners and predominantly Spanish speakers in that group, and then also English native speakers of English who are also learning Spanish. And so there's these two groups of students in early days, a perfect balance almost. And now we weren't really satisfied. I guess the district really took a very big step, in my opinion, and from the field, where we acknowledge that it's not enough to have just a lottery program when we have so many language learners who would benefit from this model of education. And so the district took a step to create the one-way program, which is specifically for English learners. And so that's the Dos Rios program. And we often get questions about the two different programs. In every way possible, they are the same. The only difference is the student groups that enter the programs, really. So we'll let Amy speak a little more if you want about it.
Sure. I think for a long time, there were a lot of English learners who wanted to be part of Compañeros, not only to be able to hold on to their Spanish through schooling, but also to be able to perform at high levels in Spanish. And also because we have research that supports that dual language programming is the programming for English learners that is most likely to result in their success in school in a number of different ways. And so we were fortunate to have the support of really the district and the board for both Compañeros, 30 years ago, and more recently for Dos Rios to allow all of our Spanish-speaking English learners to have access to that kind of programming to help them succeed in school.
And I know from just a data analysis point, we actually see our students who are in these programs outperforming some of our unilingual students, despite, like, we'll talk about Compañeros for a second, despite having instructional time, half as much instructional time, they're still performing higher in some areas. So it's really a powerful thing when you think about that. Are there any misconceptions do you think exist in the community that you'd like to clarify about our dual language programs?
You want to start and I'll tag on this time?
Sure. I think one misconception is that you have to already be bilingual to participate in the programs, and our students don't have to be bilingual. In both programs, we have students who speak only Spanish and are just learning English. In Compañeros, we have students who only speak English. They never hear Spanish at home, but they learn Spanish at school. In our Dos Rios program, all of our students hear Spanish at home, but some of them are actually a little bit stronger in English when they start. So some of them do speak both, and they're learning as much Spanish as they are English. And it's also a good program for those students who are emergent bilinguals, is what we say. They're learning to be bilingual.
Thank you for that clarification. Anything else to add before we dive into the history of how we got here?
I think just there's a larger misconception, and it's really bigger than our district and bigger than Windham, in a country where, one language is always positioned higher than another. There continues to always be the misconception that it's either really difficult to learn a second language or a third for some of our students, or that it's too challenging for students who have special needs, for example, or that we need to separate the languages in a certain way, or they need to learn one before the other. There's a lot of misconceptions about second language acquisition. And for me, we won't be able to talk about all of them today in detail, but for me, it really speaks to the fact that we are very much an English dominant, or that we position English at a higher, and give it higher power in the US. And those are all myths, unfortunately, because none of those things are really true. And it does take some education about second language acquisition to understand that all of our students are cognitively capable of entering our programs and deserve really a chance to, if that's what the parents choose. In the rest of the world, we're really in the minority in the rest of the world, right? Here in Windham, we have this kind of unique situation, but in the rest of the world, Americans are very much in the minority. Most of the rest of the world is bilingual or multilingual. And so it's really about mindset, I think, and getting outside of your sort of ethnocentric kind of space and knowing how things really work.
Sure. And brain research is pretty clear about people who do speak more than one language are actually using more portions of their brain than those who are unilingual. You would mention about it being difficult. It actually appears from some of the brain research that it's something easy for at least students, younger students, to acquire additional languages above, their primary. So all fascinating. So who would like to give us sort of the history of how we got to this place where we have these two different dual language programs? Who would like to take us along that journey?
Why don't you start, not because you're older, but because you're wiser? Why don't you start? You've been in the programs a little longer. Yeah,
sure. So When Compañeros started, it was really a leap of faith for our community. There were very few programs, somewhere between 30 and 50 programs in the entire United States. And to give you an idea of where we are, 3 years ago, New York City started 200 programs in 1 year. So there are many, many, many programs now. But Windham was looking for, we didn't have research on it, and so they were looking for a way to honor the languages and the identities of all of our students in Windham. And so they started to learn about this dual language approach, and they visited a new school that had a program in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the board decided to vote to go ahead and start Compañeros.
I know from having a conversation with one of our current board members, Mark Doyle. He was on the committee that helped bring this to where we are today.
Yes, so there was a committee of parents and community members who kind of helped plan it out. Took many hands because it was a really new concept to figure out how to bring that idea to Windham.
And now we're celebrating its 30th year. And do you want to talk a little bit about what you're planning for the celebration?
Only a little bit.
Just
we'll be dropping many more well-known names, I think, pretty soon. But I think that's one of my favorite parts about the history of Compañeros. And I've been a part of Windham at different points in my life. I had a stint earlier, and then I returned. But that there are so many people in the community, and parents and board members and educators and directors and outside forces who came in to do evaluation, that there are so many people who've sort of had a hand in its, not just its development, but it's being long lasting, right? And it's being in demand. That's one of my favorite parts of the story of Compañeros, is that it's really a community driven program, I think. And so we hope to celebrate some of those people who have been involved, and families and alumni and everyone that we can possibly invite to a small space. And we're hoping in May to do something special. We're right now in the middle of trying to book the location. May is probably the best time and best weather. So we're hoping for a date and a rain date, and we'll be able to announce that soon. We do have some program updates that we'll be giving soon too. So we want to make sure that everything is sort of sent out in the appropriate order.
So much more to come on the 30th anniversary celebration of Compañeros. Okay, what about Dos Rios? Who wants to fill me in on the history of that program?
I'll start. I wasn't here when it started, but I've been a detail keeper. So it started in the 1819 year, from what I understand, and was shortly thereafter followed by the pandemic. So, it got off maybe to a little bit of a rough start. This is its 6th year. We actually are in our very first year where we've had 5 rising classes from the elementary school to the middle school. And so now it's starting to expand and fill out as a full program. This program, like we said earlier, is really intended to be open to all of our English learners. And some of our English learners are not only Spanish speakers, but Quiché speakers, and they speak other languages. English is becoming their third or a multiple language for them.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. And I think this is another program where we're starting to see the community's ideas about it or understanding of the program change. Parents now are no longer talking only about Compañeros, right? Then now they have children in Dos Rios, siblings in Dos Rios, and they understand that they're getting the same form of bilingual education as the students in Compañeros.
Without the lottery attached, right.
And so when more of our students are language learners, it makes more sense to open more seats to those students who would benefit from it most. Yeah.
One of my tasks at the beginning of the year is to talk to parents of incoming kindergartners about their options when they have a student who is an English learner, and Dos Rios is one of those options. And so the calls are getting much faster now, because once I mentioned Dos Rios, many in the community now know exactly what that means and what that is. And so it's nice to see that. Or I'll call and I'll say, they've been identified as an English learner, and the response is, oh, good, they can be in Dos Rios.
That's great. So,
so
word's out there.
Yes.
And as we work on the details for the elementary consolidation, one of the things that's crystal clear in the ed spec is that we've spelled out both types of dual language programming in the new building. So if all that works out, those programs will exist in our new space. So very exciting. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of the dual language programming? Or do you want to touch on some of the equity work, even though I think it does intersect for sure?
Just that our Dos Rios program is expanding, and we're seeing the convergence of the two programs now at the middle school. Something that we are working on is a rebranding or a renaming of the middle school level program. And that's not going to actually be done by adults single-handedly, which is another thing that we're really proud of. Last year, Amy ran something like focus groups, but small parent and student meetings with our rising fifth graders at every elementary school. And some of that work was done to both get feedback and input from parents about middle school, prepare them for the transition, but also to get their input about what would they like a new program to be called? What might they think about that program? What are their questions about the program? And so we collected a number of possible names for that program. And we do understand it will be a transition for folks who have only ever heard the name Compañeros.
Sure.
But we have 3 rising Dos Rios classrooms now and 2 rising Compañeros classes, and they converge in the middle school and they form one single program. And so it's time probably for it to have its own name. And so that's something we're looking forward to. That may actually happen in the same year that we celebrate the 30th anniversary of Compañeros. So,
all right. So you'll keep us posted on that. Okay. As you all know, the district has a set of strategic priorities, and diversity as strength is one of our priorities. So the equity work is tied directly to that priority in our strategic plan. I don't know who would like to offer some information to the audience about the type of work we do in this equity realm.
Yeah, we were just speaking about in another group that I'm involved in about the terminology, equity and equity work and DEI, and there's a lot of DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is often the acronym that districts and organizations will give to their equity, the person who's in charge of putting something together for them to learn about equity-related things. In our district, that's me. I carry the title for that work. It doesn't mean that all of the work to be done rests with me. It really means that I'm a sort of coordinator of the district's new learning around equity. And it does mean that I have a responsibility, I think, to raise awareness around issues or ask specific questions. Our work so far has been very much at the professional learning level. We have engaged in some work with Courageous Conversations. They are an organization who are now located in DC. They were previously located on the West Coast. They have national work with school districts and other professional organizations and companies. They're located throughout the world now. Their work is focused on racial equity, but it does lean into some other aspects of identity. We have basically contracted with them for multi-years amounts of work. We did have some work last year at sort of the introductory level. We engaged in Beyond Diversity. We had about 68 district participants, K through 12, that were included all admin, being invited, many teachers at the secondary level, especially many teachers at the elementary level, many support and interventionists. We also had some paraeducators, HR. We had representation from across departments and schools. So that was our first 2 days. And then we have now continued on with them for leadership and equity, racial equity development is what it's called, LEADS training. And we have about 32 people participating.
Okay. Anything else to add on the equity side?
I'm wondering if it would be helpful for the audience to hear how Windham defines equity. I think it's often a term that we hear, in the news or we say equity, and I think people sometimes have different ideas of what that means.
I know just in general, when I think of equity, I think about it in terms of access and opportunity, making sure everybody has a seat at the table and has the opportunity to get at whatever it is we're trying to accomplish in general terms. I know, I'm sure you can add to that, but that for me, that's when I think of equity, it's really about access, opportunity, And if you do it right, then hopefully results that also are, end up being on the same plane.
Yeah, I think we've been talking a lot about equity in the most sort of surface level means like giving every kid what they need and making sure that they have access to everything that they need to have similar results to all other children. And that is actually what they need is different, right, from child to child. So that has become something I think that's more commonly understood. But the other part of equity also means that there are no predictable patterns. And so that I think is where we may have more work to do. Because we're kind of a funny district because we only have two really racial groups. We have more than two, but in terms of numbers that we can constantly look at when we look at data, we have two major groups, and so you can't see as many of the patterns across all different racial groups. But the really important part is to think about that the patterns between white and groups of color often are predictable patterns, and we need to do more work to disrupt those patterns so that they're not predictable. And when we're in a district of 72% Latino children, we don't have an excuse not to do that work. I mean, for me, that's the majority of your kids. So
absolutely,
there shouldn't really be a reason why any group is performing higher or lower. So yeah, I think we're exploring the first part really well, and I think that other piece is where we can do some more work. I think we're with the right people. I think we have a lot of great people participating in that training. And we'll see what the next step holds.
Yeah, I would agree with you that it feels like the group is very open-minded, wants to address the issues, wants to speak openly about the things that they don't want to see continue. So I agree we're in a good place. But we have a lot of work to do for sure. Okay, so far we've heard a lot from the Director of Equity and Multilingual Education and one of our supervisors. We've heard from Beth Brunet and Amy Finsmith, and now I'd just like to introduce you to another one of our supervisors in the EME department, and that's Sherry Poi. Sherry, I don't know, I know that you and I had an opportunity to work together shortly in Bristol prior to coming to Windham, but I wondered if you could tell the community why you came to work here in Windham.
My background is in teaching ESOL in a district that had a really wide variety of language learners. We usually had about 25 different languages represented, and all of the instruction was in English. The problem with a program like that is that students, it's what we call subtractive bilingualism. Oftentimes, unfortunately, students are giving up their first languages to learn English. Okay. So I was really impressed by what I learned about the programs in Windham and how they honor both of a bilingual students' languages and how they strive to make students both bilingual and biliterate. And I wanted to have an opportunity in my career to work in this kind of environment where people really consider bilingualism to be an asset.
That's really nice to hear. So I'm glad, obviously, that you've joined our team. Why don't we see if Beth can sort of give us a little idea of why you ended up here in Windham and what you bring to the table in terms of experience.
Sure. I tell a few funny stories around this. I actually grew up very close by to Windham in a small white town. And Windham was one of the larger towns that we went out to, on the weekends. And when I left after college, when I left that small town and went on with my own life, I never imagined that I would come back to this area. And I went out into the world and was an EFL teacher, an English as a foreign language teacher, and planned never to come back to the United States. And then you find out that bills in the U.S. cost a lot more than the money that you make out in the world. And so I came back as a new arrivals teacher to Norwich, Connecticut. I started my career in public ed. And when I became an administrator, you had in Windham, we had at the time an opening for the director position that had been unfilled for 6 months, and we were assigned a special master. The opening stayed, and I sort of ran from a state level agency into that position because I was really unhappy or kind of saddened by the fact that previously bilingual ed had sort of been undone in other districts. And I did not want to see that same thing happen in the course of history here in Windham. And so I jumped into the position, and I think I've been running with it since. I did leave Windham at one point and go down to Path Academy when our high schoolers were sent to that school, but decided that I probably would always come back. And so I think I already knew that. Yeah, here I am. So when there was an opportunity, I did come back. And one of my favorite parts about being here, I think we were talking about this the other day, is the staff.
Yes.
Having a large staff that really cares about the programs is really important to me.
Absolutely. You're getting old.
A little teary.
If you're a little teary. And how about you, Amy? You want to tell us a little bit about you and your history? I know that you were actually a teacher here.
I was.
Yes.
In 1998.
All right.
I didn't know. I didn't go to college to be a teacher. I didn't know that I wanted to be a teacher. I was a business major. But in 1998, I had a little bit of experience substitute teaching, and they really needed a fourth grade Compañeros teacher. And I spoke Spanish and was really interested in learning how to be a teacher. And so I came here and started school at the same time. So I was learning how to be a teacher and being a teacher. And I had a lot of help from a lot of staff at North Windham School and Compañeros. And I just fell in love with dual language and the community. I really love Willimantic. I love going to Third Thursday and seeing our families. I love when we see kindergartners joining Compañeros and I see their parents, and they were my fourth grade students in Compañeros. So I stayed for the community and for dual language.
Yeah, Windham is definitely a unique community. And when you realize that, a lot of times we talk about it, that it's like this. It has many of the struggles or challenges of a rural setting. Of an urban setting. But then it has this small town, almost a rural feel to it. So it's a really interesting place. And I agree, it's a pretty tight community. So also glad you stayed. Okay, so we have had a really nice overview of our dual language programs and some of the equity work that Windham is engaged in and plans to do in the future. You've heard about the members of our Equity and Multilingual Education Department, EME. I'm glad you guys made it an acronym, EME. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we wrap up this episode of In and Around WPS.
No, we'll save the rest for part 2.
See you in May for our party. Oh, the lottery.
Oh, right.
Opens.
The Compañeros Lottery.
Compañeros Lottery, the application period will open in January and closes at the end of February. So be on the lookout for applications and information sessions to learn more about that.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone.